Hello, welcome to the ARIA Cybersecurity and Seceon webinar. Today we're going to talk about the ARIA solution and how it's been integrated with Seceon's AI SIM. In particular, we're going to walk through an example of how the joint solution provides value in the IoT and the IIoT environments. With me today is Sunil Katagiri, and I'm Gary Southwell. Sunil, why don't you lead off and talk a little bit about IoT?
Thank you, Gary. So if you look at some of the trends with respect to these IoT devices, what we are seeing obviously is a phenomenal growth in terms of how these IoT devices are being embraced by the different industries. The mere fact that the kind of efficiency that they bring to the table is what is really exciting all the industries to really go and then deploy these IoT devices across their network. In fact, Gartner is predicting that there are more than 20 billion of these devices will be deployed in 2020 alone. Actually, these numbers are on a very conservative side, especially with the advent of 5G that is going to be offered and then available throughout the world. And then most of these devices are generally designed to connect. What I mean by that is the moment you actually put them on the network, they automatically establish the communication with the IoT controllers and then things like that. So there is not much of a control that as an installer that I have. And also they are very, very difficult to upgrade. The mere fact that the OS and then firmware that they run is very, very not very sophisticated, and the fact in the kind of capability that they can offer because of the cost reasons or whatever it is. So hence they are very difficult to upgrade. And at the same time, inherent security that these devices have are not very strong. Again, for the cost reasons, the vendors tend to take some shortcuts in terms of the capability that they offer. With that, what we wanted to really talk about is why IoT and then IIoT security is very important. According to Gartner, more than 25% of cybersecurity attacks that organizations experience are going to be involving the IoT devices. Most of these devices don't have inherent security, and they lack very basic security controls in terms of how I can really protect these devices or how I can control what they communicate with. Similarly, there is no way to really install, unlike most of the endpoints that security teams will have to manage today, like laptops, desktops, and other devices. But these IoT devices you cannot necessarily install any kind of a software to facilitate any kind of a monitoring protection with respect to these IoT devices.
It's interesting you're saying that, Sunil, as we think about IoT devices like consumer devices, but you get into medical environments, we see IoT devices all over the place. Sure, it's the wearables that walk in that people are worried about. In wearables, I'm talking about things like pacemakers and insulin pumps. And I just saw in September, the insulin pump pacemaker people were now warning the hospitals that they didn't have this type of security built in. They'd minimized the amount of processing and memory so much, there was no way to actually put an agent on top of those. So there's no real way to protect the actual patient from being hacked. And we actually seen hospitals come in and be very, very worried about that they don't want to be responsible for their own IoT devices or older legacy devices like PACS machines and X-ray machines that don't have modern OSs, can't have their own protections that an EDR provides. They're worried about their HVAC systems actually attacking the patient. So it's very interesting the way this dynamic has developed.
On top of everything that you just described, most of these devices will come with the hard-coded credentials. There is no way for somebody to go and then change them. And the cyber criminals do know about all the common credentials that are most of the, if not all of the IoT devices are programmed with. And then as a result, it makes it that much easier to breach into one of these devices very easily compared to any of the other systems that enterprises install today. And on top of it, whatever the security controls, IT or the security teams are used to in terms of protecting the enterprise systems or IT systems, they don't apply to these IoT as a result of all the things that we talked about. These are very difficult to upgrade, and then you cannot install the agent on them. Most of the systems come with the pre-programmed credentials and then everything as a result of that one. So these don't necessarily fall into typical security models that the security teams will follow with respect to really protecting the rest of the IT systems that they have in their network.
So why don't you talk a little bit about IoT types of attack?
Some of the things are hackers can compromise this device on a network and use it as a proxy to move laterally, because breaking into these IoT devices are a lot more easier than any of the other IT systems that actually has some kind of a security controls built into them, or security teams are really put some kind of a security controls. Whereas when it comes to the IoT devices, it's a lot more easier to break into. As a result, most of the cyber criminals are leveraging these IoT devices to really break into the network and then use that thing as a vehicle to get into the rest of the network. Similarly, they can compromise a device and use it as them to attack your own network. For example, Verizon has reported that a particular university was attacked by 5,000 IoT devices that are installed in their network, then use them to attack separate internal networks to bring other important systems down. So that is another example of how attackers could use your own IoT devices to bring your own network. Another example is they can directly attack the systems in your network and cause the systems down. And then again, it's a lot more easier, as I talked about different ways in which somebody can crack into these systems. They could crack into these IoT devices because they don't necessarily have all the security controls that you need to bring any of your most important industrial systems down as well. And then several examples like hackers can compromise into the devices to disrupt them and then cause harm. Hackers can also compromise a device on your network to use it to leak data directly from them as well.
So you can actually get exfiltrations being initiated by leaky IoT devices. Most people would never have thought of that one.
So we talked about so far what kind of challenges that you have with respect to protecting the IoT devices, and then how hackers can leverage some of these vulnerabilities that exist with the easier access controls that are available with these IoT devices to cause the havoc. So what are all the industries that are being impacted as a result of these lack of proper security with the IoT devices? This is not actually specific to one particular industry. The fact that all the IoT devices are being embraced by all the industries across the board, and then you would see this pretty much all the industries are being impacted as a result of lack of proper security with the IoT devices. More so with the healthcare industry, utilities, industry processes, industrial processes, and also building automation and control. So these are all the different verticals that are being under attack as a result of taking advantage of all the efficiencies that these IoT devices bring to the table. But at the same time, they're also putting themselves at risk because of the lack of proper security controls that exist with these IoT devices. If you don't have proper security controls, if you don't have a proper security strategy in terms of how you protect your IoT devices, then you are at the risk of actually impacting your company as a whole, but actually impacting your customers and then the kind of service that you offer to your customers as well.
In this next section, we're going to talk a little bit more about why there's this problem. In this slide, we actually show you a picture of a network, recap what Sunil is talking about here, and showing you this threat surface where these attacks now reside. We typically like to talk about IoT as its own little microcosm, and they're typically deployed on some of their own networks. But more often than not, they're actually integrated in, as Sunil's example showed, in with your other traditional network equipment. In some cases, it's just so that they can get to the firewall to communicate outwards. But in many cases, they're part of your own industrial business processes. They're part of what makes your business operate and business work. We'll actually walk through a walkthrough at some point that'll show you this in more detail. But here I show the IoT here in the middle. And as Sunil pointed out, these devices, they can't run your typical endpoint detection response application the way a lot of laptops and other devices with a lot of CPU and extra memory can actually support those. So their only protection really is perhaps the firewall if they're communicating outbound. But if they're communicating within your network, you can see this wide open surface with X's everywhere. There's this surface where either they can cause harm or harm can be caused to them, as we just heard. What you really need is something that can work inside the internal network, east-west as we call it here, or north-south in both cases, and help pick up these threats, find these threats, and then attempt to protect those IoT devices. Because we have the EDR here and the firewall, I just picked that because most of us in these days have those types of protections inside their environment. You may have other security tools as well. So they're generating information for you. And if we go and look at the results, though, is that because we are not monitoring the IoT directly, we're typically missing those threats entirely. Or if we see a threat, it's coming in from when it lands on another device that actually is protected. Problem here is that you're often getting too much of the wrong information that's leading you away from the issue, not toward it. You don't realize that this is an IoT threat. You're now distracted by something has landed malware on my laptops, or something I'm losing, I'm exfiltrating data out of a critical resource. And you're not figuring out that this was cause and effect from an IoT compromise that led to an attack. You end up having these issues, and you spend a lot of time in, I think SANS had a report that still said it's 279 days to actually go and figure out how to detect and then stop the threats. It's about detecting, but then you also want to have, in that case, effective containment. And that's really a problem here, because most people have no way to actually take these devices offline very easily, because there is no EDRs or other ways to make that happen. That's the normal way. We would take a laptop offline if it was full of malware. This isn't possible. And then you have the ability, as Snell pointed out, is that how are you actually going to stop data exfiltration? You've got to figure out where it's coming from, what started it. This can be difficult and very expensive. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to solve these problems here.
So Seceon AI SIEM is a solution that actually gives you all the capabilities that you would expect from a modern SIEM in terms of aggregating the information, whether it is a log information or the network information, and then giving you ability to go and then analyze that thing like the way the typical SIEM solution does. But it also goes much more beyond giving you the SIEM capability. It actually also has the built-in, what we call them as a dynamic threat models that are driven by the machine learning and then AI. What they offer is the ability to detect whether the known threats or the unknown threats using the behavioral analytics and then machine learning and then intelligent correlations. There are no rules to define. There is no customization that needed to be done. All you have to do is that bring the solution in, and along with giving you the ability to do all the SIEM functionality, it also automatically detect these threats. It not only detect the threats, all the known and the unknown threats, but it also does those things in a real-time fashion. It is not like you will know about these threats 1 week later, 1 month later, but actually at the time that the threat is really happening. So outside of this detection of these the detection of the threats real time, it also gives you the ability to go and then stop them real time. This is the SOAR functionality that the Gartner talks about. It actually much more than the SOAR functionality when it comes to our solution. It actually does. The solution has the intelligence to figure out what kind of an action that needed to be taken in order to contain a particular threat. So I will give you an example. If there is a particular system that might have been infected with a malware and then ransomware, depending on at what stage that particular threat is in, the AI SIEM has the intelligence to go and then figure out the right action that needed to be taken, rather than having someone to go and then define the playbooks and take the action that way. Similarly, if we detect a particular insider who is trying some kind of a malicious activity or steal some information, depending on what stage that particular threat is in, the system has the capability to go and then disable that particular user and also stop user from carrying out that particular activities. Seceon AI SIEM gives you all the capabilities that you would need to protect a typical enterprise environment, but we are also talking about how this is going to help the IoT and then IoT use case as well that we are going to describe in the coming slides.
Yeah, I'll just say from the ARIA standpoint that the AI SIEM is like nothing we've really seen before. It really took a clean sheet approach to doing SIEM functionality, but with an angle on let's make the SIEM not a forensic tool, but actually make it a real-time threat detection and remediation solution, all packaged in one, rather than having to piece that together and use manpower to actually go and make it work. How does ARIA fit in? As we tie in with tools like the AI SIEM, we're going to go in the network and provide some of the metadata that the AI SIEM, for instance, can leverage. So the AI SIEM has got a function that will take in metadata in the form of NetFlow. So we have our ARIA SDS solution, and we run an application called Packet Intelligence that can reside on our platform. First thing it does is it sees every packet, and then it can generate this NetFlow metadata for every packet that's traversing the network. It feeds this then into the AI SIEM. And what's interesting about IoT networks, this is pretty important, is that the IoT devices aren't necessarily having long communications with anything. And if they're infected, they can have small snippets of conversations coming out of them. So if we use traditional Cisco switches that might generate NetFlow, but they'll do it in 1 in 10,000 packets, we may miss this attack for an awful long time, or maybe entirely, because there's not enough information there to sample that properly or detect that with that type of sampling. So the packet intelligence is there to do that. Now we have other applications that are part of the ARIA SDS as well. We have a packet recorder. And this is used when you find anomalies and you need to have additional proof. What might that be? Let's say you've got critical applications that are running tied in, let's say with your IoT infrastructure, and maybe it has critical information that you need to know if there is a breach, what data records were actually breached. Recorder can actually go and do this because it's watching those conversations all the time out of, let's say, that critical database that maybe has all the employee records in it, or other system level information that's critical to the organization. This is working in conjunction with the AI SIM because it's finding problems, and once it finds it, we can say, have we just found this problem and did any data already leak out? And if so, do I have to notify anybody for compliance purposes? When you need to have that, this type of tool goes in there. The other thing that we can do with ARIA, we can apply, because we're going to be in the network, inside that east-west network flow, we can provide network-based microsegmentation inside that east-west network. The AI SIM can actually go in and set policies, and then we can be the enforcement. How is this all going to work together? We're API driven. So we're going to look for tools like the AI SIM to talk back to ARIA to basically tell it what to do. This next slide shows the joint architecture, the way ARIA and Seceon would work. Referring back to that slide we had a few minutes ago when I showed you that open threat service in the east-west network, the X's are gone. In its place, we provided now new instances of our product. So in particular, what we have, if you look at ARIA, we not only have software, but we show instances running in the cloud, and we're protecting the cloud with software instances. But in certain cases, we can also provide hardware in the form of intelligent smart NICs that go inside your servers, your critical devices, and we can protect those individual servers, all the VMs that are running within there, all the containers. As they communicate out across a network interface, we can provide protection there. Or in some cases, we'll provide appliances that go in line inside the east-west backbone and monitor all the communications there, or maybe some combination of both. The nice thing about the appliances is that's usually where we're deploying to actually protect the IoT. So that's what we're talking about today. It's actually watching all the communication going to and from the IoT at a natural aggregation point, and it allows us now to provide the visibility to feed into in this case, the AI SIM, and allow it to use its algorithms to find threats, but also give its ability to actually fingerprint the network and figure out what all the IoT devices that are out there. In addition to our applications, which we show the packet intelligence riding here, we show a packet recorder watching a critical asset over on the right-hand side. You also see in green the Seceon solution, the AI SIM. We're communicating via API, so that could be running out in the cloud, or it could be running within your own environment where it's using its ability to detect the threats. But it also has collectors out there. The CC is one of its collector applications. That is something that we have integrated with our appliance alongside our packet intelligence that can be deployed now in the environment. The nice thing about the CCE in this example is it's going to collect a lot of the information, the flows, the logs from all the systems, and then it refines it down and minimizes the amount of information that has to go into the centralized AI SIM component. That makes a lot of sense when you think about, I've got to reduce the amount of volume that I have to pump into the Amazon cloud where this may be residing or wherever it needs to go, because I can keep my WAN costs down and also limit the amount of information that I have to ingest into some cloud instance that charges me for every bit I ingest.
So another benefit that you would get with this combined solution is ability to deploy this solution in an easier fashion. So you now, with this solution, you don't necessarily have to deploy multiple appliances in your network, whereas you can see in this picture, the CC is running on the same appliance that ARIA is using to collect all the information, network traffic information and everything as well. And also one more thing, if you look at the typical remediation that is employed, the regular systems that are in them that might have been infected, typically do is if you detect a particular system to be infected with a virus, or whether it is a malware or ransomware, you would go and then quarantine the whole system. Whereas when it comes to the IoT devices, the beauty of this combined solution is you don't necessarily have to bring the whole system down. You can actually disconnect or stop the malicious communication that might have been originated from that particular IoT device as a result of a breach. You can still do with this combined solution, you can actually, if you want, you can really go and then quarantine the whole device. But at the same time, if you wanted to surgically contain a particular type of a communication, you could do that with the combined solution, leveraging AI SIM detection functionality and also based on the behavioral analytics, and then also with the power of the API integration that we have done with these both solutions, you can go and then surgically contain a particular malicious communication. So the next thing that I'm going to give you a view of combined solution, the benefits that you would get with the AI SIM along with ARIA API integration that we have done. You will get a comprehensive visibility of not only all the IoT devices that are installed in the network seamlessly, but also you will get a deeper understanding of their communication patterns and then every little communication that they have been engaged with any of the other IoT devices or any of the other systems. So you will get a comprehensive visibility. The solution itself is an agentless that fits well with the IoT devices. As we talked about, most of these IoT devices do not have the capability to deploy any kind of a agent on them. So the AI SIM solution is an agentless solution. This works perfectly to go and then not only monitor your IoT devices, and then also detect and then protect any kind of threats that might be impacting those devices. And then the solution is a comprehensive solution. What I mean by that is now you are not necessarily deploying one SIM solution to protect your enterprise IT systems, another solution to go and then protect your IoT devices. More often than not, these systems don't necessarily are managed in an isolation. They're all controlled by the same IT team. So you would want to have one single solution that will give you the comprehensive view of not only your IT systems but also the IoT and the IoT systems, but also one single solution to be able to go and then protect these things in a ubiquitous manner. So that's what the solution, the AI SIM solution with the integration with the ARIA solution would give you that. Our AI SIM solution is a behavioral analytics driven solution in terms of detecting the threats. That really fits really well in terms of detecting the IoT threats as well. IoT devices, if you look at their behavior, it is very, very predictable. With the behavioral analytics driven threat detection, you can detect any threats that are impacting the IoT devices in a very accurate fashion. And then the AI SIM does come with special threat models that are very, very specific to the IoT and then IoT devices. So there is no special rules to define any kind of a special customization that needed to be done within the AI SIM. So as soon as you deploy the AI SIM, you actually have the threat models that are driven by the ML and the AI that detects all the different types of threats that are impacting the IoT devices. And then outside of this threat detection, and then also outside of the behavioral analytics and then everything, what AI SIM also brings to the table is the automatic threat containment. So there is no human intervention that is needed in case if there is a breach happen with one of the IoT devices, the system automatically goes and contains that particular threat, especially by leveraging our API integrations.
So let's talk a little bit about how ARIA augments the AI SIM. What I've developed here is a wheel that shows you the way that investigative response team typically operates and how we are providing the right information into the AI SIM to allow them to do their job. Because of unsampled net flow, we're feeding in the metadata that the AI SIM needs to find these typically missed threats. The nice thing that we've also heard about it, because they're unsampled and the way the AI SIM works, it can take effective action at finding these threats, correlating this information together with the other information the AI SIM is collecting to actually find these problems in real time. The other thing that we can do is we can also actually look at the packet data as well. Now, often this is actually fed to other tools like IDS tools or IPS tools. SecAm builds their own. They call it the NTA, which can actually look at the packet data and then provide its own alerts, which again feed into the AI SIM. And it'll let you now verify the types of threats. Often it's finding out, I can calculate the signature to tell you what type of ransomware that is and confirm it is ransomware, APT, and the like. The other thing, as I mentioned before, is that we can also tie a recorder here, and it generates its own alerts, which can go into the AI SIM. So again, you have one visibility tool that's leveraging the data that we're providing. The important part, though, we talked along the way, and probably the most important part is once you detect the threats, you also want to stop the threats. But that's usually where people have had limited numbers of tools in the past to do that. Best case before the ARIA solution is you could talk to an EDR or a firewall. An EDR in particular, you would basically say, let me take this device offline. Or the firewall is typically, let me block this communication entirely, from this given address in and out of the firewall. What we've done here with ARIA is we've gone one step further. Sure, we can do that. We can stop and block communication completely from infected devices from inside the network in the east-west traffic path, but we've stepped it up one more notch because we heard when we started talking IoT particularly that maybe I don't want that insulin pump to be completely isolated so that I can't control it because the patient could be affected adversely, extremely adversely. So maybe we need to stop the threat that's going to it or from it, but allow it to continue to operate. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be a surgical approach to stopping the threat. In this case, what we do is we stop the threat conversation but keep the legitimate communication going. So if an insulin pump is now talking randomly to an HVAC system, we can stop that communication, but to continue to allow it to talk to its controller. The last step really is looking at how to apply prevention. It's difficult to use tools like microsegmentation, and in some cases they've gotten a bad rap over time because security teams don't typically know in advance what communications are good or legitimate until they actually have an incident and have to investigate them and then work with the other teams in the organization to figure out that stuff should not be happening. The nice approach here is that Seceon can actually come in and tell us, especially after a problem's surfaced, let's not allow that insulin pump in that example to communicate ever, or any insulin pump for that matter, to communicate ever to an HVAC system. Now we can go in and do that. So they can talk to us and we can actually apply and enforce that microsegmentation policy right from within the network. So let's go through an example of how the AI SIEM and the ARIA work together to protect an IoT environment. Here I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's going to do, and then I'll show you some pictures exactly of how this is implemented. So how the joint solution works today is that ARIA is generating the network metadata, the net flow information from all the network packets that it sees. It's feeding this metadata into Seceon's AI SIEM, in particular its APE is the instance that we're feeding this information to. This allows them to run it into their threat models to detect the threats. What's nice about getting the net flow is this also helps minimize the number of log sources that must be sent into the AI SIEM. Any SIEM will typically have this problem is how many devices, how many applications do you start to pull log information from in order to get adequate coverage, of an environment. And as we found out from the previous discussion that there isn't any log information that come from these IoT devices, so that's not even an option here. So we do need the net flow information. So ARIA can also send select data conversations to tools like IDSs and IPSs. So in this case, Seceon has its own NTA. You can think of that as a strong IDS that allows them to go in and further verify threats by certain signatures. Lastly, perhaps most importantly, as we discussed earlier, is Seceon can talk via APIs to ARIA. So to send the select conversations into the NTA, but also to talk back to actually stop the threats once they are detected. We're going to walk through that and show you exactly how that works. So that's pretty important because we want to not only stop the threat, we want to actually keep the devices that are infected online if we need to, and just take out the threat conversations. This is going to be important when we get into mission critical IoT examples, healthcare and the like, because these are often the business or lives are at stake. And we can't, have certain devices going offline if it's going to cause undue harm. And as we talked in the previous section, Seceon can also then, once we've detected the problem, isolated what should and should not be communicating, set up microsegmentation policies, communicate them via API to ARIA. ARIA then enforces those policies from within the network where you need to actually keep, let's say, certain IoT devices from talking to other systems, like an HVAC system or some other device. In this slide, we're setting the baseline here of an IoT, or in this case, it's really an industrial IoT environment. On the left-hand side, I have a series of devices. You see an IoT gateway. You actually see, in this case, it's a nuclear reactor controller. And then you see some robots that are there loading fuel or control rods. So it's a very particular industrial energy production facility. You see the network connecting over to the right-hand side. All the things in the premises are in the gray box. And as we move out to the cloud, that's where we have other devices. In this particular, we're running the Seceon AI SIEM outward in the cloud. So ARIA is in the picture here, and it's in the middle of the traffic flows, as you can see. It's there so that we can actually look at and see all the network traffic. And as I said earlier, what it's really doing is seeing the traffic, and it's sending net flows to the right-hand side in that lower line over to the AI SIM. So it's giving it that information so it has visibility. You can begin to profile the environment. The AI SIM is also pulling in from other log sources such as the firewall or whatever else is in this facility. Now, what it's allowing us to do when we provide this visibility is to begin to detect the IoT devices and then fingerprint them. It learns about them and associates the applications and what they are by learning the behavior. It also can then baseline and learn normal behavior. That's the nice thing about the AI SIM. It's got machine learning and AI capabilities, so it'll learn normal and then find abnormal, or what we call anomalies, and then associate that with threat behaviors. So let's see how that looks. This next slide actually starts with a bad behavior. There's malware being loaded coming through the Industrial IoT gateway. We're showing through the yellow line that the threat is landing on a vulnerable IoT device. In this case, it was the robot controller that's dealing with the loading, let's say, the nuclear fuel, the fuel rods. It's found a vulnerability here. It's now on this device. So what's happened is on the right-hand side, from the flow data, we're picking up this communication and we're sending that over to the AI SIM. Now, the AI SIM is saying, well, this is not normal behavior. I don't usually see this type of communication going on here. It's flagging it. It doesn't know if it's really a problem yet. It really is an anomaly. It's going to correlate that with other information. As we move to this next step, we see now the Industrial IoT robot suddenly is scanning the network, doing what we call a lateral spread. It's looking to see whatever device it can talk to. It may be loaded with particular malware and it's looking for certain things. Now, you may see that this could not be a real situation, but in fact, this is exactly what Stuxnet did back to the Iranians many, many years ago. This is exactly how that particular form of malware was operating within an environment. This case is the ARIA, again, is providing this net flow information. It's unsampled, so it picks this up. Even if it was just a quick scan, it picks this up. Now the Seceon solution sees this behavior and knows this is a real problem. And it's not only a minor alert, it's now red because it's become a major alert. And action is now going to be immediately taken. So what action would this be? In the same step here, the auto remediation has been set on Seceon where it kicks in. Now with Seceon, there's two different forms of remediation. There's a manual where they alert you and you go in and do a push button approach. But in this case, it's automated because it's an industrial control system. In this case, it's a nuclear reactor, and we want to make sure these types of threats are stopped immediately. So the automation trigger is triggered to block this device-to-device communication. So what it's really doing is it's stopping the industrial robot from communicating back to the reactor controller. Now, it's not taking the industrial robot offline. Well, maybe that's a better practice, but maybe it's not, because maybe you need to keep that industrial robot continuing to load in the reactor control rods to actually slow the reactor down. So we can't just knock these devices offline and let the reactor start to overload or go into a potential meltdown mode. So this is a good example as to why taking out threat conversations is good until you can go in and then isolate those devices or bring in some backup systems online. It's giving you time in a critical situation. So here we can see is that we've provided the full value proposition that we've talked about, other than how do we prevent this stuff from ever happening again? If you recall, we talked about microsegmentation a few minutes ago. Seceon is capable of saying, let's determine what should be talking to what, not only IP address to IP address, but also IP address and all the information on the protocol or application level can be microsegmented, meaning that we can allow certain connectivity, but not for certain applications. It has that ability, but if ARIA wasn't there, it wouldn't really have any device in which to set the policy on. You could set it on the firewall, but the firewall is not in the path here. Because ARIA is there, ARIA is the enforcer that's actually stopping the bad communications from happening in the beginning. So now you've seen the full value prop here. We found a problem. The security team now realizes certain behavior, certain communications should not be happening. It can now apply those policies. You could have started here and prevented it from the beginning, but we also find that that's not always the pragmatic way that people understand. They typically understand good behavior. They don't always understand bad behavior until they see it.
As you can see, that the combined solution not only gives you visibility of all the IoT devices and then their behaviors, but without actually having to do any kind of a customization, any kind of an additional rules or anything that needed to be defined, without actually doing any of those things, the Seceon AI SIM solution and then combining with ARIA solution on day one, it gives you the ability to detect the IoT threats real time and then stop them before they cause the major damage to the organization.
It's a good point too. One thing I would like to summarize here is that everything you just saw was fully automated. You didn't have to have people necessarily involved with detecting the problems, isolating the problems, talking back to do the remediation, other than perhaps setting the microsegmentation after the fact. All of this can be completely automated. What that's telling you is that you don't need to have heavy-duty SOC teams dealing with trying to triage a situation and stop a threat. They can figure out what's happened after the fact and do that work. One of the last things I want to talk about is if you don't have a SOC team or don't have any capability, there are MSSPs out there that are now looking to offer things called MDR services. You can go to certain MSSPs that offer MDR services based off the joint solution, and they can provide you these capabilities as a service. So you don't even have to go and buy the equipment. You can go get these things as a service offered to you from these service providers.
To add to the Seceon AI SIM solution is built as a multi-tenant solution. There are a number of very big service providers that are leveraging the AI SIM solution to offer the MSSP and the MDR solution to their end customers. What it allows the MSSPs to do is go after this IoT and then IIoT market with a simple, easy to deploy, quick to market solution.
It's a good point because you can see here in the bottom of the slide that with MSSPs, for them to be successful in selling this, they need to scale. So multi-tenancy is critical. What does ARIA bring to the solution? Well, we also help allow the solution to scale into large networks. It can span from the cloud to the premises and beyond, but also deals with higher speed networks, everything from gigabit, 10 gigabit, even upwards of 100 gigabit networks. In a lot of cases, when you get into data center environments, you need to protect these. You need to be able to make sure you can scale. So we're providing a solution that's cost effective, that can be rolled out as a services platform for enterprises to roll out themselves or for service providers to offer as a cost-effective service back to the enterprise. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Gary.